Your iPhone has some powerful, magical, wonderful capabilities. However, do you ever get the vibe that Apple decided to do some kind of mystical ancient language that makes no sense to anybody on the planet and they're obsessed with acronyms? Because, yes, it can be as confusing to other people, and this affects this, and this setting changes this one. And you just sit there and think, I don't know. I don't know what are the best settings for my iPhone. Well, basically, that's what we're going to be going through today. We are going to be making sure that you understand not only how to get the most out of your camera, but that you understand the implications of each setting and the impact it has on other things. So which settings actually improve your photography and which ones can you simply ignore because they don't matter? Let's go through them. Okay, first up we have photo formats. Obviously we need to talk about this because it's really, really big. This is about the amount of data that is held within the file so that you can use it. Realistically, this is the difference between something like a PNG and a JPEG. A PNG holds more data, and it's exactly the same when we look at the two main file formats in your iPhone. You have a choice between ProRAW, your PNG, holds more data. Great for if you want to edit and manipulate, but the reality still stands that it's going to have a larger file. This has a huge implication depending on how you set your other settings later on. But I would say if you are looking to maximize the effects and being able to do as much editing as you want to, you need to pick ProRAW. It captures a much more dynamic range. So obviously your brighter highlights, your deeper shadows, perfect if you're looking to edit. Your alternative is obviously your HEIF, which basically is the version of a JPEG. It does hold slightly more detail than in the original JPEG, but it isn't compatible with all the different pieces of technology out there. So if you're wanting to use this in another editing format, you're going to have a difficult compatibility. But what I will say is for your everyday shots of taking a picture of your drink when you're out and about, there's nothing wrong with this, but then you'll be looking at swapping and changing your settings and you might forget to put that back to ProRAW, which then leads to the second part, which is your compression rate. Okay, this is a new thing that's been recently added. And while we were just discussing that they can be up to like 100 meg, which per photo gets ridiculous, you can choose how much of that detail you want to save. What I will say is you've got a choice here, and it all comes down to how much of your heavy editing you want to do. So obviously, while it says JPEG, it doesn't actually mean JPEG. It's to do with the weight in which it transfers it if you're going to share it. So it will save it as a DNG file, but if you then share that with someone, it will compress that DNG file down to a JPEG, okay? So then you can obviously do lossless, XL lossless, and you can do loss E, which is your different rates of compression, which is all to do with the file size that you're trying to send. Now, if you are looking at doing your ProRAW at the 48 megapixel, which is obviously my recommendation for people who want to edit their photos and be able to load them up into images that you're going to like print on a wall, we'll get to megapixels in a bit, but yeah, you need to consider about the size of those files, because lossless is not going to lose anything. It's the most highly compatible, and it is the biggest file. You've then got XL lossless, which means that it's a slightly bigger compression rate while trying not to lose any detail. And then you've got lossly, which will reduce it to the smallest ones while trying to retain as much detail as possible. To be honest, I don't mind big files. I save mine out. It just depends on your personal preference on which one you're going to go for. Now, obviously, we are going to be picking up that 48 megapixels. See, with the iPhone 16, one of the biggest things we've now got is the camera button. And I've been quite surprised to hear the way people are talking about it and what they do and they don't like about it. But most importantly, I'm quite surprised that people aren't talking about the difference between using that and your finger on the screen. So I want to go through a couple of different things. Firstly, app finger press will open up whichever camera app you set it to. And yes, you can set it to a different app within your settings, depending on which camera app you would prefer to use. So if you're going to use something like Blackmagic, and then in your accessibility options, you can actually change whether you want a light press, lighter press. There's different things that you can do here to enable you to be able to pick out the different things that you want. So obviously we're going to want to open it. We want to be able to take a photo. So if you click it once and it is a click, then it will take a photo. If you hold it down, it will record. And if you scroll on it, it will change the different settings. Now, the biggest problem with this is what I found myself doing is that as I was clicking down, I was moving and it glitches some things. But it only flicks between the default settings. And what I find really interesting is if you don't use it to change your settings and you set your thing up first and you only use it to open it and take the shot, then actually you have more availability to you by doing a sliding scale on the screen rather than just sitting to those default buttons, because the scrolling between does the three buttons, whereas if you literally hold it down for a second and scroll, you've got a much more choice of which ones that you want. It's not a flick between, it is a gradual move towards it. And I prefer to do that personally. Again, it's a personal preference. You just have to decide what you want to do. Obviously, I picked up the Pro, which means it has 3 lenses on it. It has the times wide, which is the sharpest lens, and the default one by generally across the board, especially when it comes to things like video. Great for everyday shots. Your ultra wide, which is great for things like your landscapes or your street photography or wanting to capture architecture, that kind of stuff. And then obviously you've got your 2:5 telephoto. Now, what I find interesting about the 2:5 telephoto is that tries to keep as much of focus as possible. It tries to keep that detail in, but nobody's talking about the fact that actually if you scroll it keeps going past 5. And that's where I think, feel free to correct me in the comments down below, that's where we're talking about that jump between when we're zooming in and how close the subject is, the difference between the macro and the not macro. Because when you switch macro mode on, I can't help but notice that we've gone from the telephoto to the ultra wide, and sometimes that can leave you with a little bit of distortion on the images. But I would love to know your guys' opinion. I've only had it for like a week and I'm still trying to figure out the different things, but maybe we can do an update on the lenses. I can choose to turn the macro mode off and use it specifically for the moments that you want it, but because I have noticed there is a distinct difference between the two. Spatial photography is what I like to call their version of, we have a really expensive Apple Vision and we would like to know how we can utilize our ecosystem the best. So we are going to turn around and give you the ability to take a left eye photo and a right eye photo to give you a 3D vision in your Apple Vision goggles, which nobody has bought. I'm not spending $3,000 not on being able to then utilize this. This is what I like to call their gimmick feature. This is something that they're trying to bring in and understand the differences between being able to utilize the best out of their Apple Vision. If you don't have Apple Vision, this has no use to you whatsoever. So just skip. On our main screen, we want to know the main things that we can do. So I can turn our flash on or off. I'm always going to be an advocate that you turn the auto off and you only use it when you absolutely have the intention of using it. So just turn the auto off. I want raw max files. We want to be able to adjust our exposure, especially in those low light situations, which is necessary. But the one thing I will warn you is, just like in real life, when we look at those zoom telephoto lenses, the more you zoom in, the bigger your aperture overall becomes, and therefore there is less light. So more zoom equals less light. So try not to over zoom in a situation, because you will find that the automatic settings obviously in the background increases that ISO, and if you do more zoom in a low light situation, you're going to introduce a lot more grain and noise. So just be careful. So you want to keep your zoom somewhere between that 1 and that 2 in the best situation for lighting, and try and adjust your brightness manually rather than using the flash. Okay, can also set our aperture ourselves, and most of you should know by now. They have got another setting on here that's undertones. We will be working our way through those in a slightly more in-depth situation, because I think there's quite a bit to talk about there. So probably be the next video. So obviously subscribe if you're not, because we are going to be hitting that and a rather big chunk rather than just glossing over it. Now, you can turn on your grid lines, your leveling. You can make it a mirror situation. Personally, I always keep my grid lines on. It helps me to be able to level things out, make sure my composition is good. The other thing you can do, and again, this is personal preference, do you want to be able to see outside the photo? The advantage of seeing outside the photo is that you can see what you're missing. The downside is if you think it's in the shot, then you're going to miss it out because it's not in the shot. So again, it's that personal preference of whether you prefer to be able to see outside the shot or not. It's completely dependent on who you are. Obviously, when it comes to that depth of field and that portrait mode, it's basically trying to give you that idea of being able to do a lower aperture without actually doing that lower aperture. Obviously, great for people and pets and that kind of situation. It's great for food photography if you wanted to bring out that background, and it basically adjusts that blur manually to give the best effect. But I prefer it to be done because it's supposed to be there rather than add it. But there are times when it's worth adding. So use your aperture. As previously, we talked about that macro mode, great for things like jewelry, insects, flowers. The biggest problem I had with this, it can auto trigger when you don't want it to. And then because it shifts to the ultra wide lens, I can't help but feel there's some then distortion of the actual image because we're so close and it's a wide angle. You get that kind of weird distortion. So if it's bugging you and it's irritating you and you only want to go into macro when you intentionally want to press the button, then just turn off the auto thing in the settings and you'll be fine. Live mode for me is a complicated one because there are times, especially when it comes to my kid, that I find it useful. But as a general rule of thumb, I keep it switched off because I want burst mode more than I want live mode, and being able to press down and have a burst of a couple of seconds enables me to do that. Your burst mode, you can also set the setting on this of whether you would like it to be concentrating on quick succession or quality. I do recommend on this one that you actually up the quality of this instead of dealing with burst and having blurry ones. As always, if you have any questions about your phone and iPhone photography and smartphone photography in general, hit them down in the comments below because I will be answering all of them over the next few weeks. And I want to up my game of going back to taking daily photos. I failed my 52-week challenge last year, and I have no problem saying that. Life got in the way. It happens, but we are back in the running this year, and I might even do a monthly short of my favourite shots that I've taken each month because I need to get back to actually shooting more rather than teaching about shooting because I miss it. For those of you who are sitting there going, okay, but every time I go back into my settings, they're annoying the crap out of me because they're not there. Here is your number one tip that you can switch on in your settings, preserve camera settings, and you can choose which ones you want to preserve and which ones you don't. So you can preserve your camera mode, which is quite literally whether you are doing slow-mo, video, photo, portrait, and that kind of stuff. You've got a default one that you always go to and you're sick of having to swipe. Preserve it to the one that you love. It makes life a lot easier. You can save your creative controls, so such as your aspect ratios and your undertones. So your photography styles can also be saved to your favorite, and you can preserve to keep Pro Raw switched on or off, depending on whether you are a save spacer or screw it, I'll take every photo I can and I'll deal with storage later. Now that you know how to get the most out of your iPhone's camera, if you want to make your photos pop with consistent styles and edits, then make sure you check out my next video, which is all about the photographic styles within the settings and those undertones, the effortless consistency, which, let's face it, we all want. And as always, till next time, happy clicking.